Hello and welcome to the Wolf Den Podcast. I'm your home for competitive Digimon TCG discussion and news. I'm your host Nako, joined by my co-host Sanitsu, and today we're here to talk about the results of the two recent GenCon events, as well as the development of the BT09 metagame. Um, Before we go over the events and their toppings, I just have one note to make. This is actually the third week, but for those that aren't aware, we are available now on all podcasting networks. So if you go ahead and you search Wolf Den Digimon, you should see us, and you can listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, just basically all of them. So if that's something you want to do, go ahead and follow us there. Definitely appreciate it. Um,
on
so
top of on top of the fact that we also live stream this on Twitch, usually around Tuesday nights at like 8 to 9 o'clock, if anyone's interested in catching it live. And then I also have it up on my YouTube channel, so feel free to pick your pleasure on how you want to enjoy this content.
yep, yeah, definitely a couple different ways at least to and listen to us at this point. Um, so to start with, we have the DC1 top 16, um, which was an online event on Friday, I believe, right?
Yeah, it was on Friday. We unfortunately don't have any of the in-person Gen Con data. Um, Tech has not provided that. I don't know if they're eventually going to or not, or if that's just something we're going to see on the official Digimon Facebook/Twitter. But Tech did at least give us both of their online stuff. So it was the online regional on Sunday, and then it was the DC1 on Friday.
Yeah, so um, the DC1, the Friday event, top 16 is as follows. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to try and go a little quick. D Reaper, Melga X, genccon, Imperial, uh, Melga X, Alphamon, D Reaper, Imperial, Alphamon, Blackmore Greymon, Alphamon, Grandis, Alphamon, Melga X, Imperial, or Greymon X. Pretty decent spread, top 16.
8 different decks in total. But the big disclaimer is there was some technical difficulties going into round 2. So from round 3 to round 8, it was shifted to best of one. So that does kind of skew some of this data because all of our decks were obviously built for best of 3. And in OTK formats, some things just need to get lucky, which
Yeah,
is both a fun and interesting part, but from a competitive standpoint, it is a little bit unfortunate.
yeah. Given the nature that these players had prepared the deck lists for a best of three, and then came into the event and just happened to be playing best of ones for the most of it, um, I do think that the spread of the results is fairly indicative of what people brought, what did well, though um, I guess the specific amounts of each is, questionable as far as whether it would the best of ones influence that too much. Um, though the people that did manage to get here, their deck lists are still sound. So, um, if you wanted to like take a look and really break down any of these deck lists, feel free to because um, these were expecting best of threes, so they weren't allowed to make any modifications to their deck list once it was announced. They were only going to be doing best of ones.
Right. And like my big takeaway from the data that they gave us a very nice breakdown of the percentage of what each of the decks were played in terms of the quantity. So we know exactly how many Alphamon players, we know exactly how many D Reaper players, and so on and so forth, along with their highest standings, which we obviously can see for ourselves, or like hear for ourselves. But the fact that they included this breakdown, this is a first. Like I haven't seen any other TOs do this type of a breakdown before, and I like it. Just gives us more to look at, more to talk about.
Yeah, definitely a welcome addition. I know um, people have been asking about before, like, or at least arguing, which they're valid, at least as far as oh, you can't say that just because these are the top 16 decks, this is the meta, and like, who care? Like, you know, the if you took any random 16 and then looked at it throughout the event, you're gonna see different spreads of decks and um whatnot. But this is the first time we actually have had the full spread of just what was brought at least. Um, and then we have what actually did well as far as the top 16 deck lists, which is something that I definitely applaud. If every tournament gave us the full breakdown of at least play rate, it would help us better measure success rate as compared to just like we never really had a full spread during like the later half of BT or EX2 of how many blue hybrids exactly are being brought, even though, 8 or 9 out of the top 16 are blue hybrid, but like, so it is that doesn't really say too much if also 50% of the people playing are bringing it, then you would expect roughly 50% of people to top with it. We just never had that data.
Yeah, I think this is just a lucky thing that tech decided to do for us. I don't expect. I wish I would expect. But I don't think that the other TOs are going to give us the spread.
I wouldn't say never, only because the the person who assembled both these spreadsheets, Eagle X, they included it. Maybe like all the previous other spreadsheets were assembled by the same person, and maybe they had access to that data or just didn't ask for that data. And now that this other individual is doing these spreadsheets, that they are including data they do have access to.
You have a valid point there.
It
Um,
literally could have been just choice where I don't care to make a second chart or care to go down the list and count one by one by one, however many deck lists they had if there was no way to just automate the searching.
yeah. So as far as the DC1 top like deck breakdown, Alphamon out of 492 players, Alphamon was 98 of them, which was roughly about 19 almost 20%.
20% seems
And
pretty
it's
close.
yeah. Um and then D Reapers was 29 of them, so it was about 5-6%. Security Control was 25, about 5%. Grandis was 29 at about 5-6%. Metal Garurumon X, foreshortened to Melga. So Melga X was 57, so at about 11 to 12%. War Greymon X was at about 6%. Imperial 42, so about 8-9%. Beelstar 32, which is about 6-7%. Magnamon or Armor Rush 42, 41, and that is about 8.3%. Black War Greymon 19, so that is about 3-4%. And then there's 88 other decks that they didn't categorize. I'm thinking the cutoff was probably like 10 decks to like really get a percentage. So there was just a whole bunch of various mishmash that was not categorized,
Mm,
and that was the last like 17-18%.
yeah.
So it's a pretty decent spread of what people brought, at least on Friday. We do have Sunday, which is the regional, that you'll see a little bit of a shift, but for the most part, this is kind of what the meta breakdown is.
Um, Notable differences between Friday and Sunday, potentially due to the fact that it was a best of one. We don't know. Again, unfortunately, um, I will be discluding this from the overall metadata set that I do for each format, only because that best of one really kind of puts a big asterisk over the whole data set if I bother to include it at all. And I don't think we'll be really lacking of events to include anyway, especially as we do get in data from the in-person events, the larger ones at least. So the first event, the Friday event, actually had far more top 16 decks as far as few more archetypes were represented here. As we move to Sunday, it condenses quite a bit. Um, there are only 5 deck lists, 5 archetypes represented in the top 16. and it kind of just absorbs some of those fringe deck lists don't make it to top 16 in this event. So
And
go ahead.
yeah. Oh, I was gonna say it just condenses from 8 to 5. Um, and it does kind of make sense because the best of one format, it just needs to get lucky sometimes. Just because some players also weren't exactly 110% aware that it was a best of one playing their first game because they made that announcement a little bit late. But that aside, it does make sense logically that in a best of three, some of the decks might perform a little bit worse than they would have if it was a best of one.
So again, from the top down, starting with number one, Alphamon, Melga X, Black War Greymon, Alphamon, Grandis, 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 Imperial, Grandis, Melga X, Alphamon, Alphamon, Black War Greymon, Alphamon, Imperial. Um, the full player breakdown, this one's ordered by like from most to least plentiful. I don't know why the other one wasn't. I could have made a copy of the Excel spreadsheet and done it myself, but we didn't really feel like it. Um, so player count wise, 85 people brought Alphamon, 16.6%. Melga X, 73 people at 14%. Imperial 46, 9%. 43 Magna Armor Rush. 42 other. So again, that's that like too few to count or too weird to really throw a label at. Um, I mean, people are allowed to bring whatever they want, so you never really know what's encompassed in that block. 35 Grandis, 32 War Greymon, 30 D Reaper, 28 Black War Greymon, 27 Mastamon, 25 BL Star, 24 Secon, 22 Gallant. So still a decent number of decks represented here. Um, obviously
Around like 13, I believe.
only five
Yeah,
represented in the top 16. Um,
out of the 13 that were shown in somewhat decent prevalence.
yeah, but that's not. I don't really think that that's a terrible thing. Um,
No.
especially since some of the decks kind of like way overperformed for their statistical representation. Uh, like the two Black War Greymon decks when only 28 people brought it is kind of wild.
I mean, it's a good deck still. Like that's the magic of what I enjoy about Digimon is like the idea that there's still just a lot of very playable decks and it's not just completely and utterly dominated by one alone. That's why I usually like think there's always going to be the boogeyman, which is just the well-known decks or well-known deck that is poised to be probably in the best spot. But even then, it could still get unlucky or the matchup could be unfavorable or there's some spice tech that was added in or discovered that really can put some of the other decks up over the more known decks.
Yeah, and I think the floor is a little lower for accessibility this format because if you look at all of the tier 1, tier 1.5, the decks included on the list as far as decks that show up in the top 16, they all have that decently high ceiling of what is the deck doing on its play-by-play basis on its best turns, which is honestly, if you're looking at a top 16, that's what you have to know is that most of the time, I mean, I think in an 8 round event, your worst player, your 16th player is like 7 or like maybe 6 1-1 or something like that. You know, like they've won most of their matches or at least most of their games, if not most of their matches. So these people are the ones high rolling consistently.
And I think the reason why Alphamon is right now seeing the most representation, because even if we look back to Otakon, we don't necessarily have the widespread metadata, but X Antibody, Alphamon, was still 4 of the top 16, and he hasn't dropped since then, even in the best of ones, he's still like 3 or 4 of them in there. And in the top 16 regional online, he's 5 of them. So he's right now statistically the most one of the most played decks, yes, but one of the most consistent and most powerful decks.
Yeah. We've gone over it before, how just like why Alphamon is perceived as the best deck and what the deck allows it to do that other decks can't. Um, but I guess kind of really looking at more some of the different decks. Just shifting back to Friday at least initially. Um, something that um, was at least a question mark in my mind or in other people's mind or people who hadn't like D Reaper is decidedly in the 1.5 um like grouping now, whereas I wasn't sure if it was kind of more of a fluke or um it was, one player just kind of really did well with D Reaper and had like a solid list. And I know Zenitsu kind of mentioned there isn't a whole lot of iteration available with D Reaper because of the list that you have to run to play D Reaper. But just the few additions that were made from EX2 to BT9 now are actually fairly welcome because whereas previously we thought that EX2 was kind of the only format where D Reaper was going to be relevant competitively, um, we were kind of wrong. And actually, it was less relevant in EX2, and now it is already more relevant in BT9 with the addition of the X antibody option card and Death Xmon.
So, for those who are unaware, X Antibody is basically in D Reapers an option card where for free you just add a source to your Mother. You can't use it for anything, but that doesn't matter because Mother is a card that just cares about the amount of sources. So, it helps you turbo and accelerate your plays, which is very, very important because the format isn't necessarily faster, it's just higher damaging. So, you want to make sure that your setup is as good as the opponents. So that a card alone just helping you accelerate really does a lot of work. And then Death Xmon is just an absolutely bonkers card that is adding some of the best control in a deck that previously really didn't have any control at all. So I know a lot of decks now are including Starmons, and Starmons is another pretty good control tool. So they're just not even running any options outside of that X antibody, and they're not even running any tamers because that X antibody option card helps accelerate them so they don't need anything else. And I think like the shift to this type of style definitely makes them more aggressive than they've ever been before to try to chip and race the OTK based decks. And if the OTK based decks are taking too long, then Gatekeeper could still just stall them out, and then they just can't even do anything at that point because now they're going to be off of their damage game. They're off of you're on top of your security game, even though your security is usually pretty bad. But those are just some of the factors that go into why D Reapers is doing well now, on top of its consistency.
Yeah, it definitely comes down to, at least to me, um, the difference being that the X antibody option card moves D Reaper up a theoretical turn. Um, because it adds a source, and the whole deck's game plan is to get to 7. Get to 7 obviously having the Reaper in hand. Um,
I mean,
but
you can't use it for a Reaper, but just that acceleration could help you set up your gatekeepers earlier, which is insanely important.
yeah. Um, but all you want to do is just get to a point where you do have that gatekeeper online, and then one gatekeeper usually does a deck a decent amount of work. Two gatekeepers is almost decidedly not something that they can deal with. But the it is just that acceleration. Just, if you put an X antibody option card underneath your Mother on turn 2 or 3, now your +1 source, your -1 cost, and that could just be something that, oh, I can now play Jerry without passing turn 1 turn sooner, which gets me 1 more source. Um, now I have to force them to contest my Jerry by raising potentially earlier than they'd like to, or to play something to deal with it. It's just so that the deck has always had this very narrow window of the it couldn't kill you very quickly, like super quickly. Its highest best case scenario wasn't as fast as most other decks, but its slowest it could kill you as far as it like, window of acceptability. You're not hard bricked is not that far off from its fastest either. Like it's a fairly narrow window of, well, I only have 4 sources, I lose, versus I have 7 sources, I win.
And I think, like, in the grand scheme of things, it kind of is taking the control slots in a sense. Like, everyone was really hyped about the rise of Beelstar and the rise of security control, but here we are in top 16, best of 3 on the GenCon online regional, and there's not a single control list on here except for Black War Greymon. And Black War Greymon, I'd argue, is more like tempo or mid range than control. It has control elements, don't get me wrong, but that's what makes it like more tempo or mid range. You're not trying to OTK, you're just trying to stave off and deal some good damage all at the same time.
So I double checked because I usually assume a lot of interactions once I understand the basis of a deck, but um, you can use the X antibody option card to play Reaper because it just says trash 7 sources from the bottom of a Reaper to play this for 0.
Yeah, but the X antibody option says it can't be trashed by card effects.
Oh, I
That
guess that's
includes
fair.
Reaper.
I guess that's
Yeah,
fair. Never
that
mind.
that that includes
Your
Reaper.
stuff too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's relevant, but um, because usually you have enough searchers in trash anyway. You don't necessarily need exactly the searchers from underneath your mother. Um, Something else that came up too, um, in playtesting recently is nothing says that you can't raise a second mother. It just says that
Oh,
you
you
can't.
100% you can. There's just not that many good reasons to do
Yeah,
it.
it's
You
very
can.
very an edge case, but um, a situation was presented in Zenitsu playtesting where had my um, had my Jerry whiffed on a searcher for some reason, like fairly unlikely, but had it whiffed, my nest Beck's turn would have been to raise a second mother to gain an additional 1000 DP for my Starmon, effectively turning off the searchers. So yeah, if you have 2 mothers, it just means that you cannot add searchers. Um,
Via Mother's effect, but you could still add searchers via Jerry's effect.
mhm.
And with 2 mothers out, you could still put an X antibody in the second one, and now you have 2 instances of the ability. So, like, you do have some flexibility, but most players aren't really looking to do that. They're just looking to play the deck a little bit more tried and true. But it just goes to show that there's more flexibility in the deck and the tools that it has to be able to make some really wild and crazy plays. Because, like, not to try to turn the episode all about D Reapers, but like, the blocker, Creepy Hands, isn't a level, so it dodges a lot of removal that normally level-based removal just would kill it.
It dodges, I
So
think, almost all instances of relevant removal in this format, whereas previously it was garbage because who cares about a blocker? Like a blocker wasn't saving you the game, um, but um, especially it being a sourceless Digimon, it would most frequently just get bounced back to your hand. But um, it cannot be de-digivolved. It cannot be bounced via like level-based effects.
and it can't be deleted via
It,
level-based effects either.
so
So the only, like, real deletion is DP reduction, which yellow is completely absent. Shocker.
yeah, since
Um,
yeah, yellow's dead now. Rip.
well, it exists in security control, and security control is more multicolored than like hardcore yellow.
We don't claim
Um,
them.
but red through uh, DP based deletion and black through cost based deletion are the only things that are really tackling and handling it. outside of green suspending it and just beating it up anyway.
Yeah, green goes through it. Um, but yeah,
But it is a deck that the consistency and the tempo does allow it to at least combat the more aggressive OTK based decks. And that's kind of why like it sits in an awkward position where it is probably the best control deck that's not actually trying to be a control deck.
eh, I mean, I don't know if I'd label it a control deck because it's it controls via passive, like unrelated static auras. Minus Gatekeeper, it's not a control deck. So
Well,
just
Death
Gatekeeper.
X is insane. Like if they're just sitting on a field of tamers and like
Yeah,
one or two Digimon, you're 100% Death Xing that
that makes
turn
like, but like
just
a lot of
because
decks run Death Exmon,
none of these top decks run Death X.
the non OTK ones.
I don't even think the Black War Greymon lists are running Death X.
Okay, so like he's still,
Nope.
it's
None of
still,
the top 16 decks for the GenCon Online Regional are running Death X.
it's because the War Greymon and the Black War Greymon, I would argue, are still, they're not OTK decks. They're OTK aligned, and as we've seen, the black base control base, I guess, if you really want to call it that, of Black War Greymon is not the one doing well. The one that I didn't think would do well. I guess rightfully so. But the red base, I was completely, um, I hadn't seen, I hadn't tried, and um, just the inherent sec one of the starter Greymon, the +1 for I think one cost or zero cost from Metal Greymon X, along with Gaomon himself having sec +1 and reboot. Like there is an OTK shell here. It can OTK. It just doesn't have to as often, especially when now seeing this one doesn't even run it. Now, um, does the other list run the X antibody option card?
No.
No. Okay.
You really don't need the X antibody option card for Black War Greymon, and I was in the perception that the Black control base would be doing better. But the reason why that a lot of these decks are shifting more towards red is because you still have the same level of not control. You still have the same level of searching um, off of your cards, so the Agumons still search. But it is the built-in protection that the X antibody Greymon offers that the black side is
Yeah.
completely absent.
Yep.
So it's harder to get rid of your Digimon, especially since it's harder to tack into it because they both have like pseudo reboot or will usually remain in an unsuspended state. On top of the fact that now you just can't utilize certain removal type of abilities to get rid of it, makes it a very annoying card.
Well, I mean, that's that's all very valid and very true. I think more relevant though is that because you're utilizing the full suite of X antibody uh Greymon, Digimon, the Agumon line, um, you also then get access to Cool Boy, which is just the
Yeah,
best, you know, the best
I think they're not
instance
trying.
of memory gaining.
Yeah, I think they're not really trying to use Cool Boy because they don't feel like they need to. Because like Nokia technically reduces the cost, so it's like this. It's similar to gaining the memory, even though there is actually ways to out Nokia. That's they're not. No one's playing them right now. And they're still using memory boost. So like once they sit on their level 6, like usually that's kind of their solid position. Like they feel very comfortable and confident. So like Cool Boy really isn't doing anything extra. Versus Nokia where it's just like, okay, I hard play, and now I get to play an Agumon, now that Agumon searches, and now I can start doing things like it's a little bit more proactive in terms of like having a little bit better of a setup for more powerful turns later. Not saying Cool Boy isn't good. He's insanely good. Um, it's just they don't feel like they need it.
It's not as necessary, but it's still used in both lists. Um,
Nokia is not X antibody or not Cool Boy.
what do you look at? I'm looking at. Am I looking at only two of the three lists then?
Um, the oh, I'm looking at the online list.
Oh.
the yeah, the regional lists.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like it's just a tech choice if you want to run Cool Boys or if you don't. Like because you're running the Agu X antibody line, like you can, and that kind of helps customize the deck and gives it lots of different like breathing room to figure out what you want to gain out of the deck.
so I guess the third list that really kind of stood out to me, um, was just the incredible rise of success for Grandis on Sunday. I don't really know what the hell went right for them on that day, but um,
They just high rolled.
I mean, yeah, but like
Like I don't
even
want to say Grandis. Like Grandis is a good deck. It's just if I were to like grade it in terms of damage output and speed, it's probably the highest, but it has the worst searches and the worst setups compared to all of the other decks. So they you do kind of have to navigate your play lines a little bit differently than the others because your tech and tools to get to your OTK is just significantly worse. So maybe these players were just better at navigating how to get there, or maybe they just high rolled. Um, I'm not entirely 100% sure myself, but that's kind of just where my mind goes based on looking at all the lists and Grandis's overall performance.
um, so it seems as though they're fairly divided. I'm not super opinionated on Grandis lists. I don't really cared as much about them, I guess. Like I'm not nearly as familiar, but um they're literally split down the middle as far as the four lists that topped on Sunday. Two of them are running a red package and two of them are not. So
I
they're
think the
fairly
red
evenly divided
package,
as far as whether they value hero and delicate, or at least value delicate plan enough to run hero.
like the deck, because it doesn't have as great of search tools, it's not like it's actually actively harming the deck by including it is kind of where my mindset goes, where it's just like, okay, if I can't search any of my tamers, if this is a Mimi, cool, I'm in a good position. If this is a hero, also cool, I'm in a good position. If I see uh the option, a delicate plan, I'm even better. If I don't see it, I still can probably kill you if my security, if your security is just bad enough. So like it's in that position where it doesn't care, but I do kind of like the inclusion of it personally. Just because the safety net is there, but like you're not going to get to it most of the time anyway.
So honestly, I guess like it's something unfortunately that as soon as you make a decision one way or another, like you're just gonna see the other result of it. But BL and security control are actually fairly low play rates. Like they're not really seeing people playing it nearly as much as basically every other deck. For Sunday, since they are in order of play rate, they're the second and third least represented official archetype that isn't included in the other category. So you're basically just as likely as you are to see a BL star and a security control as you are like a gallant. Um, but they're way down there. So if BL star and security control aren't relevant enough for you to run the red package, I think it at least gives the deck slightly more room because that was always Grandis's weakness in my mind was that it was the OTK that was most susceptible to dying to things in security. And that's why obviously they then ran Delicate Plan.
Yeah, that and Melga are two of the like in my eyes the squishiest when it comes to running into options. They don't have as many backup plans in terms of like ways to be able to beat out those options in security. um which is why Melga X could also run it, but none of the Melga X decks were running the red package. So I think like that was a really good meta call on all of those lists because they thought about it. They were like, look, we have the draw, we have the consistency, we have the tamers to be able to utilize it even more effectively and efficiently than Grandis. But they decided not to because they just didn't need to.
Um, yeah, that's fair. I also don't think it's as good in Melga, not necessarily because it it can't utilize it to the same extent, because I know you would just run the blue red tamer and then one or
I
two
mean, even
copies of
just
delicate
hero,
plant.
yeah, even just hero is still good just because you want that extra DP on your wares. But again, it's just not needed because he has pseudo jamming.
Mm.
So
Yeah, you
every
have
time
that
you digivolve,
protection.
he's technically getting stronger.
So, um, I think I think we really will see maybe a step away from it. I think while they are like, because even one of the players that topped only ran 1-1 or 2-1. Um, no, it was 1-1 exactly. Yeah, like they were like, hey, if I see it, cool. If I don't, I don't care because I'm just gonna do my thing anyway. I'm not gonna jeopardize my deck's consistency and my deck's ratios for this small package of um, guaranteed safety.
And especially with all of the control decks being in low representation, which is odd because like I would think they would have a higher representation considering the fact that we all know what all of these top decks are doing, which is basically just beating each other in the face for a lot of damage all at once, which also thinking about it now might actually be to the detriment of those control decks, because if they don't have fast enough recovery or if their security just isn't good enough, then they could just low roll their way out of an event.
Hmm. I could probably speak to that a little bit later. Um, I only have one. Like, I guess it's more of a um honorable mention. Like this, it was one list um represented in the event. Um, and it was the 16th place from Friday's the War Greymon X. Something that I didn't expect at all. Just going through the deck list, clicking to making see if there's anything weird, and I saw something weird. It's actually red yellow War Greymon. Um, and so they run both Rise. I guess not both Rises. They run 4 red Rise, the super, and then 4 Rise Gray X as their level 5s, and then their level 6 is the yellow War Greymon from BT4, and then War Greymon X, digivolving over the yellow one, ignoring its cost or color requirements because, X
It is a
antibody
War
things.
Greymon. Yeah,
So,
it is a War Greymon by name. That's the only thing it cares about.
and something that I'd seen people do cute things with yellow red decks in the past, most notably being like the 2 Rises and then the yellow War Greymon, but um, this is the first time I've seen it do any like level of success because this is obviously a top 16 an event, and it's just I really very creative. Honestly, I'm really glad that this player did well.
I've seen it in Japan a couple of times. It does things differently than just using the BT1 War Greymon. Like you technically have more damage because you get the multi attack off with the um Greymon
Hmm.
as an inheritable, so you could swing for 4 checks like super easy. And then on the second check, you could actually gain memory with the X antibody option, allowing you to digivolve into your Wargray X. So it's definitely an interesting deck. It's also one of the things that, oddly enough, War Greymon has struggled with is blockers. So if they just have some decent low end blockers, like in the D Reaper matchup as an example, if they just have a creepy hands, like you kind of don't really have a good way in this deck to be able to out it, and that card actually outs a lot of the mid to low end blockers because if you pair that up with the Rise Greymons, you could DP reduce to be able to get rid of the blockers as well that way, versus just gaining an extra security attack.
So, just again trying to understand interactions. If I'm reading everything correctly, you could you can warp during the first swing using the effect of the yellow War Greymon and then still digivolving. So you'd gain um the full memory from both swings with the X antibody.
Yes.
Because
So you would trigger the way it would work is you would trigger the when attacking ability of Wargrey first to unsuspend, draw from your security, and then DP reduction.
hmm
Then on the on attack secondary trigger, you would activate X antibody to go up into your
War Gray X before,
other, yeah, your Wargrey X before the damage.
yeah, so you'd get the full um minimum of four checks probably, or four security, two twice, gaining you that memory back. The deck, I was gonna say it doesn't run any hybrids, but it I guess it doesn't need to because um
No, so the idea is they're running Omnimon X antibody.
yeah.
So if you like this, the really silly thing is the X antibody option, it's inheritable to allow you to digivolve on attack is not once per turn.
Yep.
So every swing you could still digivolve. So if you gain that 4 memory, you could digivolve into Blitz Omni, swing with Blitz Omni, on attack of Blitz Omni, use X antibody to then end up dealing the damage as Omnimon X antibody, and now you have an Omnimon X antibody that also has the protection from the Greymon X antibody line.
Yep.
So it's just a very solid combo play.
Yeah. It really does just kind of set you up for success because you could end the turn, they'll have zero security if you haven't won the game already, and then you pass over with a suspended Omnimon X antibody. Just kind of like,
Which will nullify the opponent's attacks, or if they try to get rid of it, then they'll have a harder time doing so.
unless you
So it's,
de-digivolve it.
I mean, again, Alphamon,
Alpha
but
Mon.
yeah, Alphamon's so good. But
Um,
I digress.
so, yeah, I can definitely see why that list worked and why it topped. Um, because I know you mentioned it, it's something I've been thinking about and something I kind of wanted to talk about, at least maybe more of like a broader discussion, because um, I know I have, and I know many others who I speak with and I kind of playtest with have struggled to find the answer to the OTK format from a control player's perspective, and I think what the results are saying are kind of similar to the conclusions that I have been faced with roughly. Um, is that the game doesn't really let us. Control has just taken a backseat. Um, only because how do you control a deck that only cares to swing once, like, or only cares to swing on the turn in which it wins the game, and has protections from basically everything it would ever want to have protection from, just depending upon which specific protections it has. So, like, if you think about your worst case scenario matchup, it being Alphamon, they have they cannot be DP reduced, they cannot be deleted. There goes most of your that's like 80% of your removal effects already as a control player. And then if they play Congo, it turns off another 20% or another 10%. And then if they play Breath of the Gods, it turns off another 10%. Now, usually, obviously, they can't play both. I actually did play up against a player who had enough memory to play both in the same turn this last weekend at my store champ. But that being said, like, even they usually only need one, especially once they know what they're playing against, because you can't run every different form of removal um, in your deck. So just rules of the game and the state of the game just kind of doesn't allow control players to play control at the moment.
Especially since Jet Selfie was limited to one because the in Japan, Yellow Hybrids was doing well. It's still technically doing well while it's not limited in Japan just yet. They'll get it when the Japanese announcement for their end of it, um, when that gets announced.
Yeah.
But like it just goes to show that the amount of recovery that Jet Selfie had really helped out control decks, um and it kind of did cannibalize yellow, but like it goes to show that like yellow without it isn't necessarily super strong to begin with, because if you think about it, a lot of these decks, there's an OTK deck in almost every single color but purple and yellow. Purple, you can make the argument, okay, there's Titamon OTK, but like, is Titamon OTK really that much better than like a mid-tier OTK deck that's not as good as the X antibody OTKs? Probably not, but like the fact that they still have one is something. Yellow just really doesn't have any kind of like big like OTK to really push the damage on, and that's kind of been their big problem. So they just relied so heavily on the control aspect and the recovery aspect to be able to chip the opponent out to death because they don't have that big damage.
Well, um, your while your statement's fairly true, I feel like your reasoning's a little misplaced because I would say that while I don't necessarily disagree with Jet Silsy's restriction, I don't think Jet Sylphie being unrestricted just suddenly makes it a top tier meta threat in BT9 because again, um, like just running through the same scenarios that I ran through with every other list. Okay, I am yellow hybrid. I have access to 4 copies of Jet Sylphimon. Okay, I have Sunrise Buster now. That's pretty cool. I DP minus what? There's nothing there. They're in raising. I kill nothing for 5 and play a tamer.
Well, Well, that's why they played the BT5 Sakuyamon, is because they just go up the line for very little. They recover one, so now they're at six. So any deck that's designed to do at least like bare minimum 4 damage or exactly five just now doesn't kill you. And it punishes a whole bunch of raising plays where it's just like you move your dude out, and now you can't use him to OTK me anyway because the security attack minus, just because it's free unrestricted recovery, cheap evolution all the way up to your mega.
I mean, I also ran Sakuyamon, but um, that's what I mean. It's not enough. Like it doesn't hard wall them the way that it sounds like it does, because while they are then susceptible to security on following turns, um, that's again assuming they don't play Breath of the Gods or Congo or a combination of them. And in Alphamon raising to kill your Sakuyamon, having blocker retail unsuspended and then passing turn just doesn't give you the flexibility to still get rid of it. So, um,
That's fair.
like, because there was actually I did play yellow hybrids at my store champ, and I was met with that exact situation. Just with my 1 copy of Jet Sylphimon instead of my 4 copies of Jet Sylphimon, and they kill the Sakuyamon, and then they pass turn with either a um, Congo or a um, Congo preventing me from swinging step at 1. Like as a hybrid, I can't attack anymore. Um, or as uh, Breath of the Gods, I can't DP minus it even on. So it can't be DP minus or destroyed until the start of their next turn, and then they just play Breath of the Gods and swing anyway, because most of my removal is DP reduction based. But so it is really that like that narrow flexibility that Alphamon offers that it just beats control up because there's really like not a lot they can do, and that's only talking about one matchup. Like obviously some of the other ones are a little better. Grandis running um Delicate Plan though just does kind of do whatever it wants to do. Melga X can usually it's probably the best matchup for yellow hybrid slash security control, BL star control, like, but at the same time, it's the speed. Um, I mean, something I remember making a mental note of from our play testing, to bring up in like the like what where has control gone discussion. Um, I was playing D Reaper and you comboed me, and you didn't exactly kill me, but you basically brought me down to zero security. It was my third turn. The start of my third turn. You ended your third turn, and then my third turn began. I had two sources underneath my mother. I was like, well, yep, that exists. I I, I can't do anything to that. Like I,
I mean,
it is my
that's the
third
high
turn,
roly.
and I've already lost.
I mean, that's the high rolliness nature of OTK decks. Like, I took D Reapers to my store championship. Actually, the ironic thing is, looking at the field of the store championship I attended, um, D Reapers nobody was on, and it was actually positioned compared to all of the other decks to be like in one of the better spots to take it. But I got high rolled with Grandis turn three. Same type of deal. He broke all my security on one game, and then the other game he actually was able to fully kill me by turn three. And like I'm sitting there and I'm like, there was zero misplays I could have done to prevent that. There was nothing I had access to stop him from out of raising killing me on turn 3. And I'm not even a control player, and I'm just sitting here, I'm like, "Wow, how do I analyze and break down my plays to learn to be a better player if there's actually nothing to analyze and break down because they just womboed me?"
Yeah. So, um, yeah, just given the state of the the meta right now and the state of how people are playing, what people are playing, there's no room for control because even if you are someone who like just wants to play control in any aspect, any form, and you're willing to play security control, um, it doesn't matter because security control also loses to these OTK decks and also loses to these these decks that just do whatever they want. And it's really just that the lack of interaction that we've like blamed hybrids for in the past, but now we've just seen it's the same situation, just slightly skewed differently because um yeah, just the entire idea of a breeding phase that lasts until you're level 5 or level 4. Level 4 is not really so much a problem, but for alpha they just get a bunch of memory. So they don't have to raise as early as other decks do, or as late as
No,
other
and the
decks
fact
do.
that they search off of their tamers, and their tamers just make and extend some of their plays is like part of the reason why Alphamon is the number one represented deck. Um, and we could say that almost definitively now, just because we have the data from two completely different, very large events. Um, and he is in the number one spot for both of those events. He is the majority of top 16 in all of the events that he's in, which is why I label him as the boogeyman deck. Because if you're going into an event, this data is really like good to look at because it could give you a good estimation of what the field is going to be. And if at least 20% of the field is going to be Alphamons, then you need to prepare for that Alphamon matchup.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, you could even look at it like, so if you take um just because these ones are in order, it makes it a little easier. If you take your top 3 matchups, you practice your top 3, your Alpha, your Melga X, and your Imperial. Again, I still expect a shift there. I expect Magnamon to do better eventually.
I think
Um,
it's just because Imperial is still super accessible because the majority of the deck is a starter deck.
16.6 plus 14.2
Are you just
plus.
adding both of them? Because Imperial on Fridays didn't even show up at all.
No, I'm adding
Oh
the
no,
top 3.
it was no, it was there. It was
So
Magna. Or
if
no,
you
Magna was still there.
if you account for the top 3 lists, that's almost exactly 40%, like 39.98% of the meta. Um, So you can plan for 40% of the meta if you plan for the top three deck lists, if you practice those matchups. And then I would add, um, just to get slightly better representation, also practice the mirror because it is one of the more skill expressive matchups to be had. Not necessarily in an OTK versus OTK format, but there's still expression of skill in every card game. So if you
Like,
practice just those
don't
three
get us
matchups and then the mirror, or move down one if you are playing Alphamon and just practice the mirror more.
and don't get us wrong. Like, yes, um, these types of decks do reduce the amount of interaction you have, but they're still like subtle, like Naka was saying, subtle skill nuances where those small, like micro level decisions could make or break certain matchups and certain lines of play, and you might not even realize that. So, like whether you hard play a searcher or hard play a memory boost, those are like they're effectively trying to do the same thing, but the end result is completely different on the spectrum, especially when you're playing it and what you're looking for, and various other things.
So, um, yeah, that's I don't know. I don't know which direction I'm gonna go with. As I mentioned, I've been playing around with D Reaper a little bit. Not really a control deck, kind of a control deck. Control esque. Um, I
I mean, if you get to a certain point in stage in the game, like you D Reapers,
just win,
this is the
yeah.
magic of D Reapers, they just win.
They have inevitability. My favorite thing.
Yes.
Which is, I guess, that is a control element of like winning if the matchup goes long enough. That's always been a aggro versus control thing of like who's if it's turn three and they haven't won yet, then the D Reaper player is probably in a better position, you know. But
I would wholeheartedly agree.
um, I'm also looking into Wargrey X, or I'm sorry, Black War Greymon using like the red base, just because it was off my radar. Genuinely, everyone I played with and everyone I played against, um, they were running black bases with the like tamer removal. I myself was running it as a means of, well, I can't kill anyone's Digimon because they're all in raising. How do I interact with my opponent? How do I, beyond just trying to kill them before they raise and kill me? Um, and the red black line actually does have a decent bit of maybe not actual like matchup um like win ratio, but it annoys the hell out of Alphamon because all they're doing is setting up a bunch of tamers that search and memory boosts that search, and you could basically get to a point where you're killing a tamer or two a turn.
Which is funny. But yeah, that's kind of why I think Black War Greymon was pretty slept on deck, and it just took a little bit of experimentation and testing to figure out which base was the best, and we now can say that the red base is the best.
hmm Yep, just and it's basically occupying that same position that um so you kind of have your like your tier 1 so to speak of your alpha, Melga, Imperial and Magna. Um and then your like tier 2 of definitely things you should prepare to play, expect to play, um, and that do show up to toppings of Grandis, War Greymon, X, D Reaper, and Black War Greymon. Like, so I know you mentioned it. Like, Mastamon's been kind of off. This is also kind of a control deck, but it just still isn't seeing results.
I think that attributes to like how OTK based decks kind of work, and this is like I've been trying to do lots of like critical breakdowns on like what's making these decks actually tick. And the X antibody option card is what's making the majority of them tick. Or just literally the ability to gain memory when digivolving is what's making a lot of these decks tick. So the idea of like I don't actually need to waste time setting up my tamers or setting anything up is what is driving a lot of these OTK based decks to be successful, because they literally operate off of nothing. They build up to a level 4 or 5 in their raising, move out, combo off, gain memory when digivolving, and they're able to extend their plays from there. If you give them anything more, then they're even better they're even in a better position to do well. Cuz I was playing Imperial, and I noticed I needed literally my Davis on the field to be able to go to 3 memory to be able to hard play my Sting to do Imperial things. If I didn't have a way to go to 3 memory, I'm never doing that line of play. And I noticed I was raising and digivolving in raising into my Pyeel more than actually trying to DNA and get the aggression off. And I, just because I couldn't, they wouldn't let me. And that was something I couldn't figure out how to navigate if I didn't have a tamer early on. And the later the game goes, the harder it is to set up a tamer, just because now you're taking a whole turn off just to be able to set up your future turns. Well, what if you don't have a future turn because they can combo you from turn like 3 forward or 3 backward? 3 onward. There we
Hmm.
go. Um so that was just something I was struggling with trying to like understand, was just the memory efficiency of these OTK based decks. And Mastimon is a deck where it kind of struggles in that similar way, but it has at least a little bit of an easier out where if you just have a Gatomon, you could at least digivolve for one and be able to DNA. But that relies on you having that Gatomon, which is the same kind of reliance on Imperial with its tamers.
I'd argue that it's worse because your worst hand isn't as bad as their worst hand.
Oh,
Like,
it's worse. I'm not saying it's not,
yeah. Um,
which is why it's
and their
not doing
best
as
hand,
well.
and their best hand isn't nearly as good as your best hand either, because
No, Maximon just moves too slow for the format. It's a very good steamroll deck, but if there's nothing to steamroll and your security isn't like winning you the game, then yeah,
Gatomon being
it's
5 just outclassed in BT9, straight up. Gatomon, if Gatomon costs 3, it'd maybe be a deck to worry about.
well, it costs 3 for raising, but like then again, that's forcing you to
But you're
play
not
the way the
searching and
deck
raising.
doesn't exactly. It's forcing you to play to not the deck's strengths, but some of the deck's weaknesses.
Or if they could play any of like the X antibody line, which they didn't really get. There is like a Gatomon X antibody, I'm pretty sure, but it's bad.
It's not good. Yeah, no. Um,
Yeah, like I mean,
but that's
just looking at like where yellow went, like look at the actual like yellow section of like BT9. It's awful. It's all so bad. Like
I
honest,
mean,
the
yeah.
best yellow card they got this format is Magnum on X.
Magnamon X and Rise Greymon X antibody.
Yeah, like
I'd make the argument best option is Sunrise Buster,
yeah,
but still.
it doesn't matter. Doesn't Sunrise Buster doesn't do anything. Um, in this format and in the future if Yellow Hybrids doesn't exist.
Uh in BT10, not to get too far ahead, in BT10 Cross Arts uses it, but I digress.
Oh, Cross Arts. Okay, there we go. Um, but still, like, I love Rise Great X, like, in it just how you can't control a deck that dodges like all forms of removal and hides and raising while still doing efficient things. Like, um, anyone that remembers BT5 knows that like Lord Nightmon was to like control-ish decks that um you would raise your Lord Nightmon and do something crazy, and then they would raise their Lord Nightmon and then swing over your Lord Nightmon and um stuff like that. But
It
what
was
if
the game of chicken.
what if when they raise their Lord Nightmon they win the game? What do you do then? you know?
Yeah, it's definitely
And
a
it can't
very
be DP
tough.
reduced and is 17k and is unsuspended and has blocker retaliation and can't be deleted by card effects.
I
like, come on.
don't you didn't hear this from me. Word on the grapevine is part of the Japanese ban and restrictions is going to be Dexdoragora. Or not Dexdoragora,
Dexter Gray.
Dexdora Gray. Yeah.
I
So
mean,
that way, like, it's not killing off the deck, but it's significantly
yeah.
making its damage output a lot worse, and it's taking off a lot of forms of protection. I
That would,
think they're going to limit that card to one the same way they've limited a lot of
and
cards to one.
Savior. Yeah, if they limit decks,
say,
I mean, that'd be really shitty though, because there's a lot of decks that get hit in the aftermath, like my Dex Doru Goramon deck.
yes. It is not it's a very tough call. Like that's just word on the grapevine. Take it with a grain of salt. I don't know 100% what they're actually going to do. I kind of wish I did. But I'm having a hard time figuring out what
I mean,
they could do.
so um, not necessarily the speculation's the name of our game, but at the same time, like, so if I were to hurt it, if I were to hit the deck without actually hitting the deck, without,
Alphamon.
well, rare Alphamon would be potentially a place if you make them not use rare Alpha. Um, like, see, like, they're not gonna
It
ban it
takes away the
outright.
de-digivolve. Like it takes away like hitting the rare alpha, it takes away the de-digivolve, and it takes away trying to bring Oryu out of the grave, so it forces them to do different lines of play and rely
Yeah,
on different
they don't get
cards.
as much value, so because basically they only need to do it once, but um, that's the part of the flexibility of the Alpha OTK is that they only need one of the dexes, either blocker, retail, or destroy a level 4 or lower. It doesn't matter which one they have. Preferably Dextoru, because it's the better X antibody.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's actually free, netting you memory when you digivolve, setting up your trash. Um,
and
I
gaining,
think
yeah, it gains you memory.
and gaining blocker and retail versus killing a dude
Yes,
that may or may not exist.
but it makes those plays worse if you're throwing away cards that you probably don't need, but given the nature of the deck, but also it doesn't help you. Whereas right now it's only helping that first time because you're always tossing Oryu to get Digivolved or to get Tuck from the trash later on.
Yeah,
Um,
but getting too far ahead, like because BT10 and by extension EX3, I unfamiliar with 100% of how that format plays, especially in Japan. So they're definitely going to be hitting some cards that we either have yet to seen or are playing with because of how their meta is. That's just the result of it.
um, well, so I
But we
guess
might not get those like hits right away. Like we might get them initiated for us when our BT9 or EX3 comes out as an example. Like they can put a delay on it like they have in the past. But it'll be interesting to see what they do and if anything they do does shake up what the rest of our BT9 does because it is supposed to come out in like the middle of August, which we're almost hitting that time.
yeah. I'm trying to find it because I know that it was posted to Reddit. Like there was like a BT10 wrap up. Um, I don't know exactly how the hell our BT10 is gonna look, only because it was largely dominated by yellow hybrid again, which is also why they restricted it, because they knew it's going to be good now and it's going to be good in the future, and if we ever want anyone to play any yellow deck that isn't yellow hybrid, we have to touch Jet Sylvie. Um,
The sad thing is it's still good and even in EX3.
uh, I mean, yeah, but
I
um,
mean, but EX3, like EX sets are kind of interesting because they do their own thing.
mhm,
But like the accessibility of this format is also kind of like a really interesting thing compared to EX sets because EX sets are supposed to do their own thing, where most of the time normal sets are kind of like additive.
mm. So there's no second picture, but um,
No, there was two of them. One was like the a medium breakdown, and one was a slightly better breakdown.
but um, it looks like with yellow hybrids effectively killed, blue flare just kind of comes back.
Blue Flare is just Blue Hybrids 2.0.
Yep. Um, and then Alphamon, blue flare.
Yeah,
Ec-
Alphamon stays, that's for sure. I think a lot of the OTK decks, like, they kind of stay just because, like, how good they are does give them
Yeah,
legs.
they don't
Like
really. It's something that I know we do talk about like greater movements sometimes, but unlike Lord Nightmon, unlike War Greymon from BT4, unlike Gabubond, unlike Blue Hybrids, I guess not necessarily unlike Blue Hybrids because Blue Hybrids had to be
Blue Hybrid
restricted.
was gonna stay. Yeah,
Blue
Blue
Hybrids had
Hybrids
to be
was gonna
restricted.
stay. Yes.
So more like Blue Hybrids, I guess, where there's a little bit of power creep, obviously, like there's a little bit of decks getting a little better, but it's not super substantial, and to the point where any tier one deck would be at worst tier two, um, in BT, one set in the future or two sets in the future if you're counting EXs, um, and that's something that I think we will continue to see unless they really blow the lid open with like BT11 or something. Because BT10 really didn't too much. It almost did like an EX thing where it introduced like two really good decks and then didn't touch anything else.
I mean, like you had a little bit of success with some other things, but yeah, in the grand scheme of things, based on the data that was given to us on the Digimon Discord, like the main 2020 Digimon Discord, they're the ones who are compiling the data for the Japanese side for us to look at. Yeah, um, it really wasn't that ground shaking outside of Blue Flare and Cross Hearts.
And um, I think that more has to say with how good OTK decks period are, like how good of they are at finding their pieces, executing their game plan, and how little you have to interact with them. But also, I think it speaks to the design of BT8, but more so BT9, and how so many archetypes were introduced with BT9, or at least supported via BT9. We have Gallant X, we have Wargrey X, we have Melga X, we have Armor Rush, including Magna X, we have Black X antibody with Alphamon. We have black purple Dexdorogoramon. We have all decks enabled by a single set, whereas looking at like competitive viability in BT10, there isn't. Um,
It's Cross Hearts and Blue Flare.
yeah, that's kind of it.
Dark Knightmon
Dark
saw some
Knightmon too,
mild
yeah.
success. Bloom Lordmon also saw some mild success. Sakuyamon gets its other half in that set. So like there's still stuff going on. It's just big picture wise, it's all Blue Flare and it's all Cross Hearts.
So,
Like even the best green deck in BT 9 is still Grandis. Like Bloom Lordmon is good, don't get me wrong. It's just again, Grandis just kills people.
mhm.
Bloom Lordmon doesn't.
um, I know we've kind of strayed away a little bit from the initial topic, but I thought it mostly being relevant and why I didn't really back us off initially, only because whenever we do get the announcement. If not next week, then the following week, we will hopefully some you guys have some basis of if you don't keep up with Japanese data like the way we do. We're trying to give you some level of base understanding, because maybe you come back and be like, well, yeah, X anybody's winning now, but it was never as strong as Blue Hybrids was in BT7. Why is it getting restricted the same thing it gets introduced? Well, here's why. Because it's still good two sets in the future, and that's exactly why they killed Jesmon. That's exactly why they killed Yellow Hybrid and Blue Hybrid. Right now, I feel like the strongest basis we have for predicting decks to be restricted or cards to be hit as a result of decks being good is because have too strong of a meta relevance for too long. And maybe that's because they made some mistakes with certain things, like Jet Sylphie costing one and recovering one, um, or with Tommy trashing three sources from security as well as stripping and then stunning on attacking. Um,
Consecutively and repetitively. Yeah. It's not
like
necessarily like pure greed. Don't get us
yeah,
wrong. We don't think this is out of greed. It is
it's
just
just cards printed outside the natural bell curve of acceptability that causes things to warp around them.
yes.
And honestly, the level of it like feedback we're getting, I think Zenitsu mentioned it a little while ago when we were talking about it, but it seems as though, based on the only data we have, which is all that we've ever had, is looks like we're getting maybe 2 restrictions a year, which is honestly fantastic. If they maintain this, if they, for whatever reason, at least somebody somewhere cares enough to look at the state of the metagame every roughly 6 months and then make an assessment on the next 6 months on does something need to get restricted. And, you know, as of English right now, um, that's just Jet Selfie and Tommy. But I think the fact that they announced a further announcement, I I think they're going to restrict something that they haven't restricted that isn't in North America, or they at least wanted to give us some time to play with, so it could be like a BT9 card. I don't think they're going to do anything older at this point. I think they would have already done it. But,
I personally don't think like anything older really needs to be restricted.
well,
Like
Doru
a lot
Greymon.
of the cards, what?
Doru Greymon is, you know what I mean?
Oh, I mean, yeah, but
It,
it's either hit that or it's hit rare alpha. And so far they haven't hit anything that's SR or secret.
that's
So
true.
that's also an interesting trend. And so far every color but black has also gotten at least one card hit. Blue and yellow has gotten the most hit, but that's because they were already inherently the most overtuned colors during their respective times that they were doing well.
Yeah, because like I said, it'd be hard for you to restrict something that doesn't hit because there's the overlap of the dexes, there's the overlap of the Dorus. Um, so it would have to be like rare alpha or Ryumon himself, but again, they're now that's kind of breaking the rule of they haven't hit an SR yet, or um, or Ryuken himself, which is again that would change a couple things if they got hit, but um,
Yeah, but whatever it's gonna be based off of Japanese results. The
yep,
majority of what they've been hitting was based off of Japanese feedback. I think Tommy was the only one that was like actually more English feedback,
mm,
just because that card was uh, to boil down the summary of why that card was hit. It was unfun. It was just too pushed and unfun. And I think that is still a perfectly valid reason to hit a card. If
yep,
it's not fun, get rid of it.
yeah. Strip and stun is just I don't think a very fun way because as I mentioned in my BT7 rant about blue hybrids and when it was just like the only deck anyone played. Um, they were an aggro deck that was also a control deck that was more controlling than any control deck. Um, and just the idea that they could do everything they wanted to in a single package of one card um, that also helped their game plan and stripping 3 sources for 3 memory is ridiculous. Um, because like every other source removal effect has not been that efficient and won't ever be that efficient, probably as they learned their lesson.
Hopefully.
Um, so yep, yeah, that's our overview of what we think is going to get restricted, I guess. So it's yeah, if they announce it by the 15th, then we'll be able to talk about it next week. Um, well, they did say the 15th, right? They will be announcing it on the 15th.
I'd have to pull up the Twitter post, but I know it's around that time because that is the middle of the month. And
Mm-hmm.
they said in
I think
mid
okay,
August,
I didn't
like
know
I
if they
think
ever
the
threw a date at it. I know they said like
I could
mid-August.
swear I read mid August, but like my mind just assumes like the actual middle of the month.
Mm-hmm.
But it's usually gonna be within that week.
So, um, the BT9 metagame I think is at least developing healthily. You know, given that the the interaction is a little bit lower than it has been, and I know that frustrates some players. Um, I have seen some like Reddit posts about people saying like, are we playing against each other? Or are we playing solitaire? Because a lot of times two OTK decks that refuse to raise, it just turns into solitaire effectively. You're just passing who gets to play their turn, agnostic of the opponent's turn, and then eventually one
And
of you
then
wins the game.
Oh, and you're just assessing security threats more than actual threat of the field.
Hmm.
But from what I've been reading up, some people still are enjoying the format quite a lot. There's still a decent amount of people who are kind of undecided whether they like how they want to feel about this format. I'm kind of in that undecided field. I think there's a lot of fun to be had still. And I will take it with my Pokemon approach of saying I'm cautiously optimistic. Do I think they could like bring it around? Yes. Am I expecting that? Maybe. But I'm still figuring out what I even want to do in this format, and I'm leaning more towards Metal Guru at this point. But that's just because I have to functionally play the game differently than how I normally used to for God formats at this point. So just this shift is personally hard on me.
Um, I didn't wanna. We don't need to talk too much about it, but something because I know you mentioned that um the OTK formats like we're we're less interactive and whatever. We're assessing security threats, but something that I think it is failed to be mentioned sometimes usually is that it is not only is it less interactive, but it is still faster. We are winning on average. The games are lasting less time. They are ending quicker. Maybe that's a result of control just not being there, but I think it is also just that like the level of safety that these OTK decks have, where like as you've experienced, you raise swing, digivolve swing, like what the hell? Like that's like the five security has never felt like smaller than this format.
Yeah, because even comparing the damage output to Imperial, Imperial is not an OTK deck. Spoiler and shocker, I know. Imperial's best usual play sits at 3 memory and then deals maybe 3 if it's lucky, 4, and if it's extremely lucky, 5 security. Usually you need more cards to deal more damage and ideally more memory. But it's not it's never had the ability to OTK somebody. Whereas a lot of these newer decks, literally off of 1 to 2 memory, out of raising can kill somebody,
Hmm.
which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really interesting to see not only how us as players adapt, but how the designers and just the state of the metagame on how we are actually playing and how the development goes. It's going to be real interesting to see where things go from this point forward. I think there's still like plenty of good ways for them to turn things around out of OTK format and out of OTK stuff. Like we saw with Crosshearts is just hyper aggro. So like, oh, if you just play faster than the OTK can OTK you faster, or play at that same level of pace, that's not OTK. That's something we see with Examon. Oh, there is just ways that we could build defensive tools to out OTK. Like they have plenty of space to work with still. It's just how they're going to implement it and how players are going to stick to it is going to be the real question.
Yeah. I do think the one thing that we're going to see kind of moving forward is that base level of your average deck to deck interaction. I think the game has sped up maybe just irreparably so. Like um I know bigger picture like Magic they plan their formats based around average turn lengths. Um and we're just kind of we're edging towards that um maybe not some like because I think Yu-Gi-Oh is at this point in the meme territory where you like you
Oh,
either
Yu-Gi-Oh is so bad. I sat down and watched a game of Yu-Gi-Oh at a locals and I'm just like, what are you even doing? Like
yeah
what actually is going on here?
yeah like
I couldn't even comprehend what they were attempting to
I
do.
mean
Um
I've been a little bit removed from Yu-Gi-Oh for a while, but
it's
when
bad.
Duel Masters or not Duel what the hell the like the online simulator
See,
thing came
Rush
out.
Duel Links.
Duel yeah when Duel Links came out again, I I played it and I talk with some of my friends who have been playing Yu-Gi-Oh this whole time and their experiences and whatnot, and then I played some myself, and I actually got some firsthand experience that I hadn't in maybe like 10 years. But um, my God, like just the difference between going first or going second. Like if you're going second and you get a turn, you've probably won the game. Like, fuck.
Assuming their board isn't 100%
Yeah, it
like
doesn't hasn't locked you
unbreakable,
out of the game. Yeah.
because that's the other thing. But it's really interesting because I draw the comparison more so to Buddy Fight, because like at the end of Buddy Fight's life, it literally turned into OTK format where almost every single one of the top decks had the insane amount of damage to just OTK the opponent. And I'm not saying we're quite there yet, because obviously Buddy Fight ran out of design space, which is why they kind of just decided to axe the game. When they did, was because they literally gave up. It was still profitable, and they just gave up. And I don't think Digimon is quite there yet. I think there's still just a lot of room for it to grow and change and move out of this. It's just how fast and what they're going to be doing on top of what players are going to be doing is the real question.
Yeah. Um, that being said, that's all the time we have. I hope you guys have enjoyed this week's episode, and we'll be back next week to talk more about BT9 and hopefully some ban restriction announcements.
And if not, at least some pet decks.
Yes. Goodbye.